All right. All right. Chapter 42. Helios. Helios. Helios, whom the cow-eyed Euryphace or Theo bore to Titan Hyperion, is a brother of Selene and Eos. Roused by the crowing of the cock, which is sacred to him, he heralded by Eos, he drives his four-horse chariot daily across the heavens from a magnificent palace in the far east, near Colchis, to an equally magnificent far western palace where his unharnessed horses pasture in the islands of the blessed. He sails home along the ocean stream which flows around the world, embarking his chariot and team on a golden fiery boat made for him by Hephaestus, and sleeps all night in a comfortable cabin. B. Helios can see everything that happens on Earth, but is not particularly observant. Once he even failed to notice the robbery of his sacred cattle by Odysseus, his companions. He has several herds of such cattle, each consisting of 350 head. Those in Sicily are tended by his daughters Festia and Lapetia, but he keeps his finest herd in the Spanish islands of Eurythia. Rhodes is his freehold. It happened that when Zeus was allotting islands and cities to the various gods, he forgot to include Helios among these. And alas, he said, now I shall have to begin all over again. No, sire, replied Helios politely. Today I noticed signs of a new island emerging from the sea to the south of Asia Minor. I shall be well content with that. C. Zeus called the fate Lachesis to witness that any such new island should belong to Helios. And when Rhodes had risen well above the waves, Helios claimed it and begot 7 sons and a daughter there on Nymph Road. Some say that Rhodes had existed before this time and was re-emerging from the waves after having been overwhelmed by the great flood which Zeus sent. The Telchines were the aboriginal inhabitants, and Poseidon fell in love with one of them, the nymph Helia, on whom he begot Rhode and 6 sons, which 6 sons insulted Aphrodite in her passage from Kythera to Paphos, and were struck mad by her. They ravished their mother and committed other outrages so foul that Poseidon sank them underground, and they became the eastern demons. But Helia threw herself into the sea and was deified as Leucothea. Though the same story is told of Ino, mother of Corinthian Merlicertes, the Telchines, foreseeing the flood, sailed away in all directions, especially to Lycia, and abandoned their claims on Rhodes. Rhode was thus left the sole heiress, and her 7 sons by Helios ruled in the island after its reemergence. They became famous astronomers and had one sister named Electrio, who died a virgin and is now worshipped as a demigoddess. One of them, by name Actis, was banished for fratricide and fled to Egypt, where he founded the city of Heliopolis, the first taught the Egyptians astrology, inspired by his father Helios. The Rhodians have now built the Colossus 70 cubits high in his honor. Zeus also added that Helios's dominions, the new island of Sicily, which had been a missile flung in the battle with the giants. D. One morning, Helios yielded to his son Phaethon, who had been constantly plaguing him, for permission to drive the sun chariot. Phaethon wished to show his sisters Prote and Clymene what a fine fellow he was, and his fond mother Rhode, whose name is uncertain because she had been called by both her daughters' names and by that of Rhode, encouraged him. But not being strong enough to check the career of the white horses which his sisters had yoked for him, Phaethon drove the first so high above the earth that everyone shivered, and then so near the earth that he scorched the fields. Zeus, in a fit of rage, killed him with a thunderbolt, and he fell into the river Po. His grieving sisters were changed into poplar trees on its banks, which weep amber tears, or some say, into alder trees. Footers. 1. The sun's subordination to the moon until Apollo usurped Helios's place and made an intellectual deity of him is a remarkable feature of early Greek myth. Helios was not even an Olympian, but a mere Titan's son, and although Zeus later borrowed certain solar characteristics from the Hittite and Corinthian god Tessep and other Oriental sun gods, these were unimportant compared with his command of thunder and lightning. The number of cattle in Helios's herds, the Odyssey makes him Hyperion, is a reminder of his tutelage to the great goddess, being the number of days covered by 12 complete lunations, as in the Numan year, less the 5 days sacred to Osiris, Isis, Set, Horus, and Nephthys. It is also a multiple of the moon numbers 50 and 7. Helios's so-called daughters are in fact moon priestesses, cattle being lunar rather than solar animals in early European myth, and Helios's mother, the cow-eyed Euryphasia, is the moon goddess herself. The allegory of a sun chariot coursing across the sky is Hellenic in character, but Nilsson, in his Primitive Time Reckoning, 1920, has shown that the ancestral clan cults, even of classical Greece, were regulated by the moon alone, as well as was the agricultural economy of Hesiod's Boeotia. A gold ring from Tyrans and another from the Acropolis of Mycenae prove that the goddess controlled both the moon and the sun, which are placed above her head. Excuse me. 2. In the story of Phaethon, which is another name for Helios himself, an instructive fable has been grafted on the chariot's allegory, the moral being that fathers should not spoil their sons by listening to female advice. This fable, however, is not quite so simple as it seems. It has a mythic importance in its reference to the annual sacrifice of a royal prince on the one day reckoned as belonging to the terrestrial, but not to the sidereal year, namely that which followed the shortest day. The sacred king pretended to die at sunset. The boy Interrex was at once invested with his titles, dignities, and sacred implements, married to the queen, and killed 24 hours later. In Thrace, torn to pieces by women disguised as horses, but at Corinth and elsewhere dragged at the tail of a sun chariot drawn by the maddened horses until he was crushed to death. Thereupon the old king reappeared from the tomb where he had been hiding as the boy's successor. The myths of Glacius, Pelops, and Hippolytus, stampede of horses, refer to this custom, which seems to have been taken to Babylon by the Hittites. 3. Black poplars were sacred to Hecate, but the white gave promise of resurrection. Thus, the transformation of Phaethon's sisters into poplars points to a sepulchral island where a college of priestesses officiated at the oracle of a tribal king. That they were also said to have been turned into alders supports this view, since alders fringe Circe's what is that word? Circe's Aea whaling. A sepulchral island lying at the head of the Adriatic is not far from the mouth of the Po. Alders were sacred to Phoronius, the oracular hero and inventor of fire. The Po Valley was the southern terminus of the Bronze Age route down which amber, sacred to the sun, traveled to the Mediterranean from the Baltic. 4. Rhodes was the property of the moon goddess Dana, called Chimeria, Ialisa, and Linda, until she was extruded by the Hittite sun god Tessep, worshipped as a bull. Danae, maybe that's it. Danae may be identified with Helia of the sea, Leucothea, white goddess, and Electrio, amber. Poseidon's 6 sons and 1 daughter, and Helios's 7 sons point to a 7-day week ruled by planetary powers or titans. Actis did not found Heliopolis on or Aonis, one of the most ancient cities in Egypt, and the claim that he taught the Egyptians astrology is ridiculous. But after the Trojan War, the Rhodesians were for a while the only sea traders recognized by the pharaohs and seem to have had ancient religious ties with Heliopolis, the center of the Ra cult. The Heliopolitan Zeus, who bears busts of the seven planetary powers on his body sheath, may be of Rhodian inspiration, like similar statues found at Tortosa in Spain and Byblos in Phoenicia. Where is that?